This is the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, session number 118. Mark Andreas on Hypnotic Connections.
Welcome to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett, your professional resource for hypnosis training and outstanding business success. Here's your host, Jason Linett.
Welcome back. It's Jason Linett here with a phenomenal conversation that you're really going to enjoy. I've met Mark Andreas in passing at several conventions up until recently, and then by wonders of scheduling and vendor area planning, got to share a table next door to him at the Hypno Expo 2017. And then once he was back in Colorado, once I was back here in Virginia, reconnecting and having this conversation that we're now sharing with you. There is an outstanding theme that's often, I would say, pondered upon in many trainings, whether it's hypnosis, whether it's NLP. And it's where we start to talk about how habits are formed, how learning really establishes in the mind. And the premise is often introduced, wouldn't it be wonderful if kids could grow up knowing this? You know, rather than trying to muscle up with willpower, instead, how do you go in and reprogram the unconscious mind? What if we could operate from this place of curiosity and this place of you've got many more options at your disposal than perhaps you've given yourself credit for? So again, so often the new student of hypnosis or NLP would have that premise of, wouldn't it be wonderful if kids could grow up knowing this? Well, the cool thing is, that's kind of Mark's background. His parents are Steve Andreas and Connie Ray Andreas, two of the people who were there in the formative years of NLP. And you're going to hear us actually have the dialogue of what it was to grow up with this understanding as just part of his upbringing, and the experience of being someone who grew up with it, moved into other territories in terms of his life, and now has come full circle back into it as a trainer, as an author, and as a practitioner in his own right. You're going to hear some interesting experiences of his work working in wilderness therapy and working with troubled youths, troubled teens, and all sorts of outstanding information about Mark, as well as information about his books. You can, of course, check out over on the show notes at worksmarthypnosis.com, or simply head over to markandreas.com. That's ANDREAS, and Mark is spelled with a K, markandreas.com. And with that, let's jump right into this conversation of the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, session number 118, Mark Andreas on Hypnotic Connections. So one of the questions that I'd usually kick off by asking somebody is, at what point did you discover hypnosis and NLP? And the side note is that so often the conversations will get into this wonderful, heady, big picture theme of, oh, it'd be great if people grew up with this stuff. Yet, Mark, here we are chatting and you grew up with this stuff.
Indeed. Yeah. I have a lot of times people ask me, what was it like having parents do NLP on you all the time?
Yeah, it's a great first question. Let's go with that one.
So my first response is, well, how would you like if somebody NLP'd all over you? But it is interesting that a lot of people have this initial, I don't think a lot of people realize it, but the difference between doing NLP on someone versus doing NLP with somebody. And so my experience growing up with my parents was very much that they were using these NLP tools, communication tools, hypnosis tools with me and my brothers. It never felt like they were using it to try to control us or, using it on us. So
I think that's a massively important theme. And it's where, the simple example of, as we talk about building rapport, so many of the original points of that were about getting in sync with somebody, modeling their experience to better communicate with them. And it's been kind of pulled into these other sales models at times to go, if I sit like you, you're going to buy my stuff, when really it's allowing that better communication to flow.
Yeah, exactly. So it was very much my experience growing up was that for the most part, it was very much in everyone's benefit, my parents as well as us.
Is there a specific story that comes to mind that kind of highlights that?
Yeah, well, I guess, one of many stories, but one that comes to mind at the moment is just the presuppositional language of, when we were really little kids, and this is something that's, if you have little kids, you've probably used this, or, for listeners, this can be a really useful thing, is the whole, would you like to go to bed now or in 5 minutes? And, of course, we would be like, oh, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and then pretty soon 5 minutes would be up and we'd be happily going to bed. And so, it's an example of you could look at that and say, oh, that's manipulative, but it really wasn't at all, because, sleep is something that everybody needs, including kids. So it was very much in our benefit to actually go to sleep, and to go to sleep in a way that didn't cause a lot of upset and crying and, oh no, I don't want to go to bed right now, and that kind of thing. So that's just a simple example of one of those presuppositional language patterns that they used with us as kids that just kind of set this, introduced us to the fact that, okay, we're like, bed's going to be happening soon, and you get to have a little choice in whether it happens now or in 5 minutes. And so that honored a little bit of choice making on our part at the age of 5 or whatever. And at the same time allowed us some time to start getting used to that transition and ready for that transition, as opposed to having it just suddenly sprung on us in the middle of creating some block tower or whatever we might have been doing.
Which I'm flashing to. You've seen my kids, and there's a moment where the importance of highlighting. Yes, that's not necessarily manipulation. Here was the day yesterday that we brought the kids to the local water park, and Max, at his absolute tiredest, that's when he's the fussiest, getting ready for bed. Though right. I can think of a time, which this leads into a question for you. I can think of a time with Claire, our oldest, who's now 6, where she clearly has found 2 pieces of candy somewhere in a drawer. And the question was, can I have this one or can I have that one? And of course, the answer was, well, no, neither. We were about to have dinner. So the question to you would be, is there a time that you can recall where you were the one, again, where it's the difference between doing it to as opposed to doing it with, where you found yourself becoming more aware of your own language in that environment as the child in the family?
Yeah, well, there was that does bring to mind a moment that I don't remember, but my parents remember it, because of course the kids are the best at just modeling what their parents do. And so there was a moment where I was talking with one of my brothers, similar to the candy example with your daughter. I was talking with one of my brothers, so it worked better than if I had tried to my parents. But I was talking to one of my brothers, and I go, like, I wanted him to play with me, basically. And so it was something along the lines of, I go, hey, Lauren, do you want to come out? And then I stopped, and I go, Lauren, which would you rather do? And then I gave 2 options, both of which I involved him playing with me in some way. And so my parents had a little chuckle over that.
Nice, nice. So then at what point would you say the formal education of it started to work its way into your life?
I would say, formally, yeah, I guess the most formal setting was when I actually took the practitioner training, which was soon after graduating college. Although I studied my mom's advanced language patterns tapes in college for a college project. So I guess in college and shortly afterwards, and, reading some of the early NLP books, Using Your Brain for a Change and Heart of the Mind. And, before that, I certainly heard all these interesting stories from the trainings that my parents ran, and unusual cases and, examples of people making pretty impressive changes from being in really stuck places. So I kind of grew up with a lot of those stories and Milton Erickson's stories. And I remember in high school reading Uncommon Therapy and skipping over all of Jay Haley's analysis, but just reading the case studies of Erickson working with people and just finding those really fascinating.
So then growing up, was it the goal to continue along that same path?
It never was specifically. So I really was, there was never any assumption that I would follow along that path. Even once I graduated college, pretty soon after I graduated college, I worked for a wilderness therapy program for a couple of years. So it certainly involved a lot of conversational skills, and gave me a lot of on the ground, firsthand kind of experiential learning about a whole wide range of behaviors of basically these kids. It was a program that kids were sent there by their parents, so mostly they didn't want to be there. So wide range of behaviors of defiance and trying to push my buttons, trying to run away, trying to sneak things into the program that they weren't allowed to, and so I got a lot of on the ground experience for dealing with a wide range of different behaviors that were often pretty conflictual between me or between students. And then it was after the wilderness therapy that I'm like, okay, what am I going to actually do as a career? Because camping, spending half of your year in a tent with teenagers, surrounded by teenagers, although awesome, was not something I wanted to do the rest of my life. So that was when I started realizing, hey, I want to, this NLP stuff could be a good way to interact with people and get and stay interesting. And it's something I've always been fascinated in, is how people can change and achieve, resolve conflicts, whether it's internal or between people. I think that's really what was always the theme for me, is interest in conflict resolution. So I didn't necessarily think that I would go into NLP, but I studied peace and global studies in college, and soon after college published my first book, which was a whole collection of true stories of people's true stories of conflicts that people found creative outside the box solutions to.
Well, I think that highlights a very important point that, whether it's NLP, whether it's hypnosis, that not everybody who goes through a training is coming out of it with the goal of actually sitting down and, let's use the previous language, of doing hypnosis